Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Jen. This is Adarian. We wrote a book called Let Me Introduce You, and we are going to be discussing ACL injuries today, specifically ACL injuries in the NBA, because of this paper that Adarian sent me, which is called Mechanisms of, see, I've got the full thing going. Mechanisms of Anterior Cruciate Ligament Tears in Professional National Basketball Association Players, a video analysis. So because this paper was based on images, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the paper for the first half of this. And then if you want, there will be a second part that actually is the video portion where Adarian walks us through some things, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just making sure. I know the lay of the land.
Correct. Yeah, second half video. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Before we get into kind of what ACL injuries in the NBA look like, I think it's kind of important to understand some of this data. So this particular paper looked for ACL injuries occurring in the NBA from 1975 to 2022. I did a little math, yes.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'll bring that up later. Go ahead.
Okay. So I did a little math and I based it on averages because the NBA has grown from 18 teams in 1975 to I believe it's 30 teams in 2022.
Yeah.
That's what Google said. I don't know if Google might have been wrong. Yeah, right. So there were approximately 3,760 players during this 47-year time frame. This assumes that the average NBA player plays about 4.5 years during his career. Of those, 98 players have had ACL injuries, according to this paper.
So the math is saying we shouldn't be talking about this. And I guess too, part of the reason that we're talking about this, because the players that get hurt are the ones that play, which are the stars. The ones that don't get hurt don't. The ones that aren't playing, they're not stars. So the reason we're talking about, I mean, if you're a bench player, you go out to meet, nobody cares.
It's true. And the other thing I found really interesting about this is only 7 of those sustained multiple ACL injuries.
So yeah.
So we have 98 players, 105 ACL injuries because 7 of them sustained multiple ACL injuries. Percentage-wise, this is about 2.6% of NBA players.
I think it's less than 2%. It's 2%.
I think so, unless again my math was wrong. Maybe it was less. I don't know. It's not very many.
Yeah. We can do a quick math, but yeah. But not only that, but it goes with the standard across the board, even like NCAA stuff, where roughly 3% of the population gets injured. 3%.
So this is kind of in line. This is kind of in line with that then. If my math was correct, 2.6%, 3%.
Yeah. So and that's all I said is why are we worried about 3%. The other 97, the other 98%, the other 97% is doing just fine. They call this like a pandemic type thing. We got a pandemic. We got a rash of injuries. No, you don't, dude. You got 2% over a 45-year period.
47 year. Right. And that's a whole lot of players, 3,760 players. And again, only 98 have been with the ACLs.
What's that? Was that 1 or 2 a year?
Yeah, I think so.
1 or 2 players a year. But now let's really put this in context, though. Let's really put this in the context of this here. And let's put it in modern standards. Let's say modern standards that, and this is when the numbers become really eye-opening. Is you have a person playing, let's say he's a starter, and let's say he plays 35 minutes of a 40-minute game, and he plays average 35 minutes a night. How many games they play? 70.
It's a lot, something like that, yeah.
So you're talking about this guy is playing 35 minutes a night, and let's say how many contacts? Let's just contact. How many times does his foot leave the ground, come back on the ground? How many times does he da 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 da? So now you go, okay, this person's been playing all this games, all this contact, and then that's like the airplane going down, you know?
That's a good analogy. Totally. Yeah.
At some point in time, the airplane's going to go down. I just don't want to be on that plane.
Right.
It's kind of simple. You know, at some point in time, the airplane's going to go down. At some time, a boat's going to fail.
Right.
You know, so, but do we say, I'm not going to fly? You know, but once again, what the difference is, if the plane crashed, they go back steady, they know exactly why the plane crashed. Somebody gets hurt, we have no idea. That's what we can talk about today. We're gonna put some ideas behind it. So that's what we're getting into today, yeah. But you have to think about that for a minute. The number of contacts that lake has gone through, you know, and oops. So yeah.
Right.
That's
And all the variables that go into those contacts, because so what these researchers did is they looked at video analysis of 27 in-game ACL injuries. So only 27 of those 98. Yes.
And this is video analysis.
This is video analysis.
Okay.
Yes. To try to determine.
Very important in a minute.
Right. Yeah. To try to determine some potential causes of these ACL injuries. They found that of these 27 incidents, 5 of the incidents had no player contact at all. 21 of the 27 incidents had indirect player-to-player contact prior to the injury.
Okay.
10 of 27 of those incidents had indirect player-to-player contact during the injury. And then contact prior to and during the injury were 9 players, 9 of those incidents.
So how many players just fail in a sense? 5?
Yeah.
So you're talking about 5 people now.
5. Because explain, can you explain like what does this mean? Like indirect player-to-player contact prior to the injury? That's like somebody going to get the ball. Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't hit the knee directly. They kind of hit the person. Yeah.
Right. And then during the, did it load?
Yeah.
Oh, we were successful. Cool. And then indirect player-to-player contact during the injury is more than a brush as the person's coming down onto the leg, or however the injury occurred, right?
Yeah.
And all of those things, are those considered perturbations?
Oh, that would be a perturbation, yeah. Even come down the ground is almost a perturbation, because you don't know.
Right. Right.
But you know what it is?
What?
It's a proprioception.
Proprioception. That's like one of my favorite words.
Yeah, I just had to say it. I'll come back to it.
Okay, wait, how is it proprioception?
See, you should have let it go.
Oh no, we're coming back to this.
There you go. It's proprioception because what's going on is you're in this space and you're moving through air. And so what the body is sensing is when am I supposed to come down?
Yes.
And that's the proprioception part. When am I going to come? Because I'm not even looking at the ground anymore. So proprioception is telling me when am I going to come down. And based on that, I'm going to get my landing in.
This makes sense. And if you've got a perturbation that you're dealing with, that can throw some of that off, right?
Not really, because you're still dealing with the same, like we'll look at one of these, we'll look at the one I recorded, you know, what's happening is the person is still trying to look at the basket as he's coming down. So proprioception is still working, like it's still to understand this is when you contact the ground, but the person himself now is doing something, you know, as he looks at the basket and is causing, but we'll get to that later. But as far as that, he can't see the ground anymore. So the only thing that guides him to the ground now is the fact that he needs proprioception to help him guide to the ground.
Yes. And the definition of proprioception, for all of you listening who are curious, it's your unconscious awareness of your body and where it is in space.
Yeah. And so falling is, I can't see the ground anymore.
So before we get into what the authors concluded about all of this, when you sent me this paper, you said this is collisions gone bad.
Yeah. So that's what. So let's get into this. These guys are observing video.
Right.
based on their observation, they make a paper or a study
Yes.
based on their observation. And like anything, the whole thing about it is, with any study, with anything else, you can only, with science, the worst thing about science is, if they can't observe it, if they can't measure it, to them it doesn't exist. So these guys can only be biased a certain way, because they can only, what can they see to measure, to observe? And based on that, they make it a study. But the question is, what did they miss? So that's probably the worst thing about science and using science, especially somebody's observational scheme to determine something, is like, ooh, even like in the one video I watched where the guy said, the leg has to be in a straight position. And then he shows the bent leg. He said, that's relatively straight. No, dude, that's not straight. It's bent still. But you're trying to make it fit these criteria that you set up, and it doesn't fit anymore. Yeah. And like they said, trunk leaning over, and the trunk's not leaning over. After the injury, the trunk leans over, because why would it lean over that way? Because he's trying to get off the load. So once it's after, but they said during, no. So that becomes the whole thing with trying to use these things. But we get to that too. So yeah. But the biggest thing is for people, that's why when conversations take place, everybody has to be on the same page, as far as information. So I think, we're going to some things that we talk about just to put everybody on the same page, where we talk about collision. And collisions is two objects run into each other. So anytime you leave the ground, you hit the ground, you collide it. Now, the whole thing about it is this here. The body also will collide with itself.
Right.
Because the foot's collided with the ground, and the body's still coming down. Right. And at some point in time, it's going to meet up with, it can't meet up with the ground, so the only thing it can meet up with is itself. The body's trying to move up as the body's trying to move down. Same thing, if I drop my arms down, my arms just collided into my body. That's a collision. And so I think I sent you the one on like even on me running, right, where the one video, the other video, you can see them basically colliding into myself as I'm running.
Right.
No big deal, because that's not gonna, but for some other people that may be a big deal. That may cause them to, be jarred and things like that. So the other part too is understanding gait mechanisms. And so when we talk about these things, there's some things that how is the body supposed to be acting in the first place? And that's what we get talking about too when we talk about these motor learning patterns or central nervous system and things like that. And to me, I think that there's certain things already built into the system. It's going to happen. If this feels pressure, this is going to happen. It's then statements all day long. If this happens, this is going to happen. This happens, this is going to happen. And so one of the things that happen as you walk is the knee is what I call buckle should relax. Base is going to bend. Right. So at some point to you, and that's what we see a lot, is when you hit the ground, the knee kind of gives out of the way, and that's just extending the collision. And also the knee doesn't take the blow, it just gets out of the way. Yeah. So, and I call it just buckling. It's just really just like somebody pulled the rug out from underneath it, or like we talk about that feeling you get when somebody's walking behind you and they kick you in the back of your leg and it just buckles out, so there's people can have awareness of what that is and everything. So, but that's doing just normal gait. That happens. Now, some people walk straight legged, but it doesn't happen.
Right.
For the most part, when people run, jump or something like that, and they have a collision with the ground, the knee will go ahead and just relax and bend out of the way, So, so that's what we're going to get too, is we're going to put that in there, that's part of what we would say is normal gait, to help out with this whole process and everything. So, okay.
Right. And if that doesn't happen, then you end up with a collision that creates unwanted vibrations, correct?
Right, because it's going to continue to travel. Now it's basically landing on a straight leg, and it's going to continue up the system. It's not going to, it's not going to stop here. It's going to go till around your brain. That's what sometimes people say.
Yes.
Going straight to your brain, your teeth are vibrating, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the biggest thing is how, with collisions, people need to understand, and we're not getting to the physics of elastic, inelastic collision, all that kind of stuff, which is just a transfer. One object can stick to the other object, or the object, without no loss of, that's a whatever thing.
Right.
We get into is the fact that a collision is going to be extended.
Yes.
And it's just a way for the body to slow down. And it's just a way for the body to slow down, because you don't want your head to run back into the ground, and that's what you don't want, this jarring effect. The foot hit, and then all of a sudden your head's being jarred. You don't want that. So what does the body do? it slows down the head. So it's going to say, we're going to bend you out of the way so you can slowly slow down. So by the time you get to the stop point, you're not being jarred anymore. So extended collision is just a long deceleration period. That's all. It's just a long, and the longer the deceleration lasts, the less of that energy is being transferred to whatever's being protected. Because the foot took it off. The foot took it, but you're still traveling downward. So it's the head that's slowly, or the low back that's slowly decelerating before it runs into some, and then it becomes a low impact issue versus a high impact issue.
Right. Which can change the vibrations from unwanted to wanted.
Right.
So
right.
there's
So
benefits to this. Yeah. This sort of thing.
Liquid, and we got these things going on in us, that liquid slosh around, just like it sloshes. So.
Right. And one of the things that allows for these collisions is a series of rotations.
So, well, yeah, everything's rotational. I mean,
yeah.
It's one of the things that if we're moving, it's rotational.
Right.
And people don't see it that way, but they should. But if my head moves, it rotated. If my arm moves, it rotated. It rotated. Everything is rotational. There's no way of getting around that and stuff like that. And so, the trunk goes this way. And a lot of times people talk about these things like internal, external rotation. We like to use the words pitch on roll. It gives a better description of the direction and everything as far as movement or rotation in all directions. I remember when somebody said that if I have my arms out like this and I do this, that's internal. I'm like, internal to what?
Right.
Internal. This is, so this is the difference. If it's here, it's internal to what? If it's down on my side, okay, I get it. That's internal. But it's out here, internal to what anymore?
Yeah.
It's nothing here anymore. But pitch, yaw, and roll takes care of those things.
Right.
So that just puts people on the same page too. That I don't think internal, external rotation covers half the things that people.
Well, and some of the conclusions will touch upon this as well. So you'll have some fun with.
Yeah. Even one of the videos we're going to watch, where the guy says, "This is rotating," like the thing didn't move.
Right.
It didn't move. or it's pitching, and he called it internal. How's that internal? It's moving away from the body. How's that internal anymore? How's that external? So yeah, crazy. But yeah, that's it. But so everybody's on the same page. We get these terms out of the way, and then we can. So.
Kind of bring it back around. So what did the authors conclude? They looked at all these 27 videos, they analyzed them, they found, when the injuries were occurring. They concluded that something called single leg casting, bilateral hopping, and single leg landing after contact were 3 distinct ACL injury mechanism classifications. During these 3 mechanisms, injured limb contacted the ground during a deceleration event outside of the base of support. Can you explain what all of that means?
Googly gosh. Yeah.
Well,
think about that. Single leg landing outside the base of support. You can't.
Right.
The single leg is the single.
Yeah.
So now what they may mean is they see a single leg outside the base support means the leg may be to the left of the body or the right of the body, not underneath the body.
Right.
But once again, we have joints. And because we have joints, it makes these things work. So if that's what they're really talking about in a sense. And if I was to stand up, so people that can see this, single leg landing outside of base support. And this is why this is funny, because basically what they're saying is the leg's over here, my body's over here as I'm coming down. But guess what? If I come in here, guess what? That becomes this here. It should go this way here. Rarely are you going to land with the leg directly underneath. Rarely is that going to happen in these sports where you're spinning and twisting. Where you're going to land exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's too many variables to allow for that to happen every time. That would be like a very controlled setting where the foot would always land underneath you.
Well, unless you're a gymnast.
Right, that's true.
Unless you're a gymnast, but but they have to do that for a reason. They want points.
Right.
They have no outside influences. They have no perturbation. There's nobody bumping them while they're in the air. There's no, I'm not trying to do a layup. I'm not trying to duck underneath the body and oops,
Yeah.
I see it, all of a sudden I got to try to avoid it. They don't
Yeah.
have those things going on. So it's a different story. So, but once again, we have these joints that allow us to land. That's what, they allow us to land with this leg, away from the main body and things like that.
That makes sense. So what other things did these authors conclude? They further included, this is Adarian's favorite term, as we've already covered, internal rotation on the tibia increases strain at the ACL ligament and also induces anterior tibial translation. What does all of that mean?
Well, translation means it's not
Isn't
rotating.
that right? Isn't that shearing?
Yeah, basically translation. Well, yeah, or it's moving, but it's not rotating anymore. In translation, But the other part is this here. If you, I'll do this. This is cool stuff.
This is cool stuff.
So, if you look at this leg, and so what they're saying, the tibia is rotating, but nothing else is rotating.
Right.
That's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard that the tibia is going to rotate and nothing else is going to rotate. That's really hard, that now the thing is, just this here, on some of these, and we'll play some of these things in the video because the guy's pointed out and he says that, if I'm landing this way, so I'm coming down this way.
Right.
And they talk about, that this is going to rotate. It's hard because once again, people got to remember this here. And like the video, we got to bring this term pressure. When there's pressure on something, it's hard for that to move.
Right.
Of the pressure. The only way for it to move, you got to take the pressure off, like you saw the guy on the one arm. That arm is not going any place until he takes the pressure off of it.
That was a cool video. It was a one-arm handstand guy hopping from one block to the other.
So we're doing the same thing. So if I'm on this leg, it's pressurized. I can rotate my upper body because it's not pressurized, but this leg, it ain't going nowhere. It's
right.
There. So the only way for me to do something is I have to unload it. I have to take the pressure off of it. And
right.
if I, and this is what the guy did in the video. Basically, he did that.
Yeah.
He took the pressure, did that. He took the pressure,
yeah.
but this, like I said, if an object's under pressure, it's hard for the object to move anywhere because of the pressure is holding it in place.
Right. So what else did the authors find? They also found, Adarian also loves this, athletes with greater knee and hip flexion angles upon landing were at greater risk for injury.
Yeah. But this is the other problem too. They didn't blame straight leg stuff.
They did not. Yeah.
The other guy. That's the funny part. So this is saying, these flexions causing problems. Some other guy said, no, straight legs causing problems. That's a funny thing. So yeah, it's funny. But once again, we have joints, and rarely are we going to, and the thing about it is, what does that mean compared to whom? Compared to what?
Right.
Greater than what?
Yes.
Because you didn't go back and watch everybody land. Right. And then say, look at all these people landed this way with this degree of no problem. These guys land this way, we got a problem. So what are they comparing this information to say those words? Because what's the word? Greater than?
Greater than, yeah. Greater knee. Also athletes with greater knee and hip flexion angles upon landing.
Yeah, what does that mean, greater than?
Just greater knee and hip flexion angles. I don't know, greater than what? They didn't specify.
Yeah, I'm saying greater than what?
And maybe they did earlier. I think they may have had specific degrees that they were looking at in terms of.
But still greater than what are you comparing it to?
Right.
Because you didn't have this measure before the athlete got hurt.
Right.
So that's like, this whole even like body weight stuff where, sometimes they put these words, they have to do what they got to do. But when they start what I call embellish or decorating, and that's basically decorating. My line is just decorating this, They could have said that, they were at these angles, but say greater than, people talk about body weight stuff, 3 times your body weight. This is a tremendous force. 3 times? Yeah. That's 1, 2, 3. What about 10 times? What about 30 times? What about 40 times. What made 3 times a huge force?
Right.
And so then people take this information and say, man, I got to deal with this huge force. Determined by, so greater than is determined by
the researchers that be.
I say that bias, the more it's decorative. Because once again, just put the information out, let us deal with it.
Right.
But when they say greater than, then people go, oh.
Right. No, it's true. So there are some suggestions that were given from the study about what we should do to prevent ACL injuries. And some of these, you're going to love these. You should practice single leg cast and bilateral hop without excessively striking the ground outside of the base of support.
That's why you got hurt. So why not practice it when it got you hurt? If you already did that in the game, you have to practice that. Just play the game. You'll do that all the time. No big deal.
It's true.
That's what I posted. I think I posted it on Instagram. Because same thing. Nobody's practicing this. Because think about this here. Think about this here for a second. Knees over toes. What's implicating? That knees going past the toes is a problem. That severe knee flexion is a problem.
Right.
Then you read the study and go, nobody's in that position that you said you're bulletproofing for.
Yeah.
Nobody's in that position that you're bulletproofing for.
Right. We have some other conclusions. Hip flexions should simultaneously accompany rapid knee flexion induced by deceleration.
It's already decelerated. You collided with something.
Right. Right.
As they talk about the collision, and one reason the body's folding up is because, but it's trying to protect up here.
Right.
And so that becomes the other thing. The joints usually are what's helping us out in the situation and everything like that. But you're already decelerating. You ran into something. You ran into something called the ground.
Right. Well, and this is because if your knee buckles when you run into the ground, you create the space to move into, essentially, right?
Right. So yeah, because some and you gotta remember it's a longer path. Things start taking a longer path to travel. So
right.
Always it's one of those things where once you hit the ground, and it's kind of simple. I guess we should demonstrate that for people that are going to watch this. That some people walk straight-legged, and all that means is their foot hits the ground and the knee stays straight.
Right.
And you can walk. I mean, it's no big deal to walk straight-legged. No big deal, But a better way to walk is when your foot's on the ground, the knee's going to flex.
Yes.
Because that helps this next collision out. This is a heavier collision, than this one here. And all it's going to happen, you get to a certain point, the knee just bends, and you just step through it, So that's the whole thing. But the same thing, if I jump and land, guess what's going to happen? If I come down on one leg, guess what's going to happen?
Right.
So all these things are going to happen where this knee wants to bend upon because it's trying to slow the system down anyways,
Yes.
And so if you get to a certain part of your foot, guess what? So if I get to a certain part of my foot, the knee's gonna do this anyways.
Happens naturally. Yeah.
But now the other part too, and this other thing too, what gets people, and this is the beauty of the system, why joints are good. That does that. So that does that. That's the beauty of it. The rotations work because it's off activation. So it's amazing how all of a sudden things bend and the hip goes, the rotations work. You need that knee to bend.
Right.
And that way I can be off kilter, be outside the base. You can be all these things because the knee bent.
Yes. And for those of you that can't see the video, Adarian took a step forward, knee bent. He allowed himself to rotate around the leg so that he was suddenly facing a different direction.
Yeah, all because my hip got displaced.
All because his hip got displaced. Yeah.
But once again, if you don't understand rotations here, if this is spinning this way, and then that bends, it's going to continue to spin. But it's so much easier than if all of a sudden this is not bending, and this wants to rotate or go someplace else, then we have a problem.
Right. So the problem essentially comes when one thing is still and the other thing is rotating.
Not when we watch the videos, you see different. So when we watch the videos, the problem is yes, we have to see the video.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll see the video. Yeah.
Okay. That's part two. So
when people are blaming on something, don't blame it on the joints. The joints do what they do actually protect us.
right.
It's not that the joint bent that caused me to get hurt. It's the fact that the joint bent protected me from getting hurt.
Okay. A couple more conclusions, and then we will end this and we'll go into part two. During single leg casting, posterior trunk lean and lateral flexion should be avoided, which makes perfect sense when you're playing a sport like basketball.
But once again, like I said, if you understand joints, everything's okay. Because what they're saying, I mean, how many times am I going to try and do some? I'm coming in this way.
Yes.
But you got joints, and if the joints, they do their thing, everything's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's like I said, perfect. Yeah. So I can't play basketball. I got it.
Oh, I would love to see a basketball game where there's no lateral flexion of the trunk.
No lateral and posterior.
Yeah.
It just got boring. It just became non-athletic. You just stop being athletes.
And then the final conclusion, and I took this quote directly from the paper, so I paraphrased a lot of this stuff. This is a direct quote from the paper. In such cases, quadriceps strength, neuromuscular timing of the quadriceps, and hamstrings in rapid deceleration, hip abductor strength, and motor control strategies that allow for hip flexion and not relative hip extension and deceleration would all be considered important.
Yeah, good got yeah.
So basically, we're supposed to train neuromuscular timing of the quadriceps and hamstrings and rapid deceleration to help protect us from this potential injury. Yeah.
So, and you know, once again, you know, hip flexion, if the knee bends, guess what the hip does?
It flexes. Yeah. Like it's a coordinated system for a reason.
Yeah, it's coordinated. So yeah, you don't have to worry about that. Just, you know, but once again, you know, like I said, you got this thing, this perturbation that just happened.
Right.
And there's no time to correct for it, basically.
Yep. Which at the end of the day, like you said, this is collision's gone bad. At the end of the day, that's what's happened. You've had an unexpected event. So this perturbation.
Right. And the system doesn't have time to rebalance you. And that's why I said balance is the biggest thing. And people talk about balance, it doesn't have time to rebalance you to put you in this position to be okay again.
Right.
So yeah. But interesting paper.
So we're going to conclude with that. If you're interested in knowing more about how this all works, I suggest you purchase and watch the next section, which is going to be Adarian going through some video analysis of the ACL. And again, as a reminder, if some of these concepts didn't make sense, I strongly suggest you check out the book, Let Me Introduce You, Tales of Levers, Threesomes, and Movement. All right. Thanks, everybody. Oops, didn't mean to do that.
Live streaming has stopped.